Today, I'm Laura Oyen, and I'm coordinating the Como Neighborhood History Project, and we wanted to give you guys and gals an update of where we're at with it. We did an awful lot of work this summer with our St. Kate's students, and we're waiting for some of their output that we can post up on the website. So if once that gets shared, we'll start going through the updates. There's a lot of detail on here that is, it's not as cute as Jessica's PowerPoint with her cute pictures and everything like that. We're not quite to that point yet. We're still in the work piece of it. So we're just giving you an idea of all the things that we've been working on this summer. So the first slide is just, you just want to page down on that, Shevik. That'll work. This is just an overview of the project vision of where we're at, what we're doing. We're collecting oral histories. We are sharing stories to the Know Your Como platform, where you want to create walking tours of each sub-district. We're doing research on stories and sites. And ultimately, we want to have some historical signage and public art to illustrate all the cool things that have occurred in the Como neighborhood. So next slide. Okay. And then here's a little bit of background. If you didn't know, this group kind of started September of last year. So it started as discussions regarding racial equity as a spinoff from the Neighborhood Relations Committee. We ended up connecting with St. Kate's professors in October. And then by spring, we were working, we presented what we wanted to do to this committee, and then it went to the board, and the board approved our relationship and working arrangement with St. Kate's and their summer scholars. So next, please. So what we've done over the course of this last year is we had suggested a couple Sunday series topics, and two of those were presented. One was regarding St. Kate's welcoming the Dear Neighbor project that talked about a lot of census data of who lived in the Como neighborhood over time, and that was recorded. There was also a Booth Memorial Hospital speaking presentation that, can you help me with their name, Marcia? Kim Heikela did, being her mother gave birth to her oldest adopted sibling back at Booth Memorial Hospital, which is right on Como. So she gave a nice presentation of that. So that's a very interesting part of the story of St. Paul here in Como. We had a walking tour on June 9th with 14 people, some community members and several St. Kate's summer scholars and faculty. So we did a quick walking tour of the neighborhood to get a start of what we are looking at and the interesting places in Como. We spent most of our time in District 1 around Midway Parkway, but then we worked our way through some other areas on Victoria and also into the streetcar station afterwards for a discussion. We've attended all of the area site events that D10 hosted at Northdale, Orchard, and the Ice Cream Social, and we'll be at the this Saturday's one at Tilden Park, which is right down the street from us. And out of that, we had 42 different contacts of people who either emailed information to us asking to be involved or signed up and stopped by the booth and signed up our sheet. And so we're starting to include them in the projects, whether they are contributing information or story ideas or wanted to be interviewed or knew someone who would be interviewed. With our St. Kate's summer scholars, we ended up completing 10 oral history interviews with longtime Como community members. We have 14 additional interviewees identified that we're hoping to get to sometime over the course of the next year. And we also published 2 articles under the Know Your Como website. One was the 1886 Como house and some stories behind the history of that house that a community member wrote for us. And then I wrote one on the Midway Garden Club history. So we've been putting little pieces out there to try and get more interest in it and get people excited about it. So next slide, please. Right now, we're working on a timeline of all the things we're trying to do and keep moving so that we can balance our time and energies of the St. Kate's students moving forward. So August was pretty busy. We have these oral histories, and now we have to kind of figure out where to store them because they're electronic. We have some thank you notes we have to send to St. Kate's. We have to determine next steps for the oral history project. We've updated lists of volunteers, interviewees, interested parties. We will need to reach out to individuals who weren't yet interviewed and let them know what our next steps are. And with St. Kate's, they worked on some written projects, writing up the interviews and creating a story timeline of some of the information they've uncovered, coupling that with quotes from the people we interviewed. So that's an item that we saw this summer. Marcia and I, in August, we were invited to their presentation to their peers at St. Kate's. So we went over and saw what the product would look like, and now we're just waiting to get the links to what they produce so that we can get it on the District 10 website. In September, like I mentioned, we'll be at the Tilden Harvest Festival. We also need to meet with St. Kate's teams, 1, to wrap up what we did this summer, and 2, there are 2 classes starting this fall that the St. Kate's professors are going to have their students help us with some data visualization projects where they will turn our ideas of locations into some more visual map that people could follow and follow the history of different neighborhood areas. That we're not quite sure what it's going to look like because we're offering it up for the students to determine that. We're also hoping to, in September, write up a grant so that we can get transcriptions of these oral history interviews so that we can keep a hard copy of that in addition to the electronic copies. Next slide, please. From here on in October, again, we're going to work on our walking tour development with the St. Kate's new classes. We have a couple meetings all set up with them, and we're going to hopefully finish that grant request by October 14th and brainstorm possible signage locations around the district. One of the things you may notice about Como is that there's nothing that says it's Como neighborhood. We have state fair signage, we have grand round signage, there's state fair signage. Many of our neighbor other districts next to us have signage that say the Hamlin Midway area or North End area, but we have nothing that signifies our area as the Como neighborhood. So one of our small groups of people who have been volunteering will want to get together and see if we can figure out some possible signage locations so we can continue, in a sense, branding the Como neighborhood. We want to present them the information from St. Kate's maybe sometime in October. We have some ideas for additional Sunday series that we might discuss in November, and then start working on more of our oral histories, turning them into short stories, possibly continuing our oral history interviews, and some other brainstorm about maybe a history day hookup with Como High School Murray Middle School or the Hmong Charter School, because History Day kind of gets kicked off in November. So we've reached out and opened it up to the schools that maybe there's a student who can do history of a neighborhood or a business in the Como neighborhood. So we're done a lot of outreach, and we're starting to figure out how to pull those outreach folks together. And we're working this year, the key to it will be getting what we've collected out to the electronic form through Know Your Como, or even more specific information on the St. Paul or on the history section of the District 10 website. We have a date in December to view the output from these fall classes in December. And then next slide, please. And then January, we're looking at maybe a second grant, maybe some other planning for the summer with summer scholars, just some general ideas we threw out here on a timeline just to kind of keep the project moving forward and not stagnating. So next slide, please. And then where we are now, we're waiting to hear back from St. Kate's to recap our story map and timeline, and then figuring out how to maintain their product that they worked on. We're going to start working with new fall classes from St. Kate's on the visualization project. Hopefully we can keep doing oral history interviews. We want to complete the legacy grant and submit that. And again, do a larger presentation on all of the work that the St. Kate's folks have done, while we're trying to find more writers and stories that we can have people start writing up some of the things we've uncovered during the research. And whenever possible, we want both virtual or in-person events. Next slide, please. Where we want to go is the same place we've been before, have fun with community participation. We want to keep using St. Kate's research, and then use some of St. Kate's technical skills to get a product that we can share with the community.
Right.
Next slide. And then we're open for questions for this. Marcia, did you have anything you wanted to add or share with this?
No, I think you've covered it well. We worked on it yesterday, so I think it looks good. Yeah. We'll happily answer questions. Right.
Yep.
Hey, this is Shevik at the streetcar station. You mentioned applying for a grant by October 14th. Is that the Minnesota Historical Society Legacy Grant that's mentioned later? And
Yep.
is the second grant timeline, would that be an additional version of that same grant, or is that a different grant you're looking at?
That would be a different grant.
Different
We'd
grant.
see if we get the money for the oral histories, and then the next phase would depend on what information we're getting back from St. Kate's, and if we want to try and we'll brainstorm what potential options would be. Do we need a writer? Are we finding lots of information and lots of history to put together, but we don't really have someone to write it up to make it into a story? So that's part of the discussion. But those grants are offered every quarter, I believe,
Right.
up to $10,000. So I just put it on there as something that we could just, again, to keep us moving along if we know what we're going to do or have a good idea of what we're going to move forward with. So.
That's great. I'm glad you guys are looking at that. And by the way, all of this is awesome. And the picture, these guys sent me pictures of the St. Kate's presentation of the visualization map, and it looks so cool. I can't wait to get that and share it on our website and get it up there, and to see what else that they come up with. And then my only other comment is a suggestion for the neighborhood branding. I've been around a lot of different neighborhoods in St. Paul, and my favorite version of neighborhood branding is the bicycle racks with the neighborhood cut into them. And I've actually designed a couple for downtown that we never found funding for, but like, I would love to work on one for Como too.
Cool, cool.
Yeah, that's one of the ideas of if we try and figure out spots that we could label our neighborhood, which if you think of all the main arteries that go through Como, like Dale Front area, I mean, there's no big space. Even at Hamlin and Hoyt, the nice looking space is kind of already taken by the church signage over there. So maybe Midway Parkway, there could be one up by Snelling, but every year at the fair that, you know, things are parked there. So I think we'll have to be a little bit creative of that. With some of the signage issues too, we have two parks in the Como neighborhood that don't have any signs whatsoever. So those need to be, you know, signs pulling through. One of the areas like some of the, your bee garden, Jessica, that you're working on Front and the Superfund site, that might be a really good spot for once you figure out the gardening, but also history and the area. So they're, you know, trying to figure out locations where we can brand ourselves. You know, do we want little banners or not? Even with some of that, depending on where the street light is, there's so many trees that block it that, you know, banners might not be a piece, but that's just one of the ideas. Once we get more of the history going forward, we are finding out lots of little tiny bits and pieces going through different things. And I know Darlene's there, and we're going to be meeting on Friday with Dwayne, who did a wonderful write-up of all the history of your family farm. Do you want to tell us a little bit of what you've been talking to Dwayne about, first of all, before we meet on Friday?
Sure. Well, the farm was originally my great-grandfather, and how he got the property, that I don't know. But the farm was like in the 1860s. And my dad actually did quite a bit of a write-up of some of the things that he did, because he more or less grew up on the farm and knew the whole neighborhood and ran around in the whole neighborhood. And so anyway, so Dwayne has all the listings of who owned the property, but it's all been in my family. So it went from my great-grandfather to my grandfather, and then my dad. So we've all been a real part of the farm.
So, and that's a big part of this area that even links to the state fair, because it started by the Agricultural Society there. This was all farmland approximately a little over 100 years ago. And so we're finding stories about farms, people who do, you know, did some sort of farming and things like that, that we want to, you know, if you just moved into the neighborhood today, you know, it's completely built up, everything's there. You really don't get a feel that it was an open space and a rolling hills. And a lot of the oral histories we were hearing about the people right over in our neighborhood were talking about how these, you know, they would go sliding and there'd be these big hills and areas that are completely flat now. So, you know, how humans transform the land. One of the really interesting stories that was mentioned at the Orchard Rec Center was that the Orchard Rec Center used to be a cemetery at one point in time. And I was down at the St. Paul Library and we found the documentation that talks about that. And so this was an ongoing issue from like 1838 to 1955 through the discovery of the cemetery and converting it over to a playground rec center. That was all a community driven project that took, you know, over a decade to do. So, you know, we have bits and pieces of information for that, but who would be a good source to help write that up so that we can create a story and create the history markers later on with these stories. So people are really coming with some interesting stories about the neighborhood that we didn't know about, or businesses, or events like a fire at a business, or different things like that. So we're trying to create lists of businesses, locations, artwork that we'd want something written up about, and then trying to put that together in an organized fashion with the help of St. Kate students, and or ultimately, if we have enough information but not enough bandwidth of writers and things like that in the community like this, maybe it's something that we hire someone to write these up so that we can keep moving and recording the stories.
Thank you so much, Laura. In the interest of time, I'd love to get into our old business and talk about the upcoming Harvest Festival. Anybody have any other last minute questions?
Just real quick, and it's just like logistics, and maybe Shevik, we can talk about it later, is do you think we need to do an action item to get approval to do the grants, to have the grants get written
Yeah,
in the future?
if we're applying for it with P10 as the name organization, which we probably are, we should do an action item, but I can connect with Laura after this meeting and work on that. And
Okay.
Thank
Thank you for your time.
you, Laura.